Alright, there we go. So, what's up guys? Pretty much same deal as last night. Just wanted to do another video, kind of have some fun and, again, take people's minds off of everything. Sorry for the late start. Our professor's very bad at giving us a heads up with the chemistry homework, so that kind of came out of nowhere. But, making the best of it. And we'll see if people start showing up here, just so I'm not talking to myself the whole time. Hopefully they will. But what I wanted to do tonight is I got a lot of feedback over the Native American stuff that we talked about. And also got a lot of feedback over some of the differences in pottery throughout history, especially in the Asian cultures. So I was kind of going to talk about a few different things tonight. I was definitely going to touch up on the Asian stuff. Hey, Dick. What's up, dude? But I was definitely going to touch up on some of the Asian stuff once people start showing up a little bit more. Because there's a lot that we could talk about in pottery, especially as an art form in Asia. Especially Chinese and Japanese, there's a lot of difference between both of those cultures, even though a lot of people, when they first hear, like China or Japan, a lot of people sort of think of those two cultures as the same thing without much differences. But there's a huge difference. And actually, let me grab my notes real quick. Also kill some time while people show up. There we go. Which so far it looks like it's just Suzak. Nope, there's somebody. Gives me time to get set up anyway. If I was smart, I would have had all this set up before I even went live, but oh well. Okay. Hey, Jackson. Just getting everything set up real quick and pulling my notes up, and then I'll kind of repeat everything that I rambled off there at the beginning. Yeah, now that people are starting to show up more. What's up, Colton? Yep, that's not what I wanted at all. Alright, while I'm getting this set up, since a lot more people showed up, I'll go ahead and just kind of repeat what I said at the beginning. But basically tonight, my original plan was we were going to have a bit of a program and discussion over Native American storytelling, lore, and myths. But a lot of the feedback that I got, both last night and today, was more interest in pottery in the different cultures. So, and one of the cultures, because last night when we were talking about pottery, I very briefly touched on pottery in Asia. And a lot of people wanted to know more about that, especially because I mentioned porcelain, which, if you don't know porcelain, what it's mainly used for nowadays is porcelain dolls or like statues. That's like the main use of it, today. But porcelain was huge in China. It actually, there's a bit of discussion on it, but most sources are going to say that it was first found, discovered, and manufactured in ancient China. So because there was a lot of interest in that, I was going to go ahead and touch up on that a little bit. And we'll just kind of go from there and see where it goes. Let me just get the last of my notes up real quick. And also, if any of y'all weren't here last night, because I'm not sure who all was here, honestly, a lot of people showed up last night. But basically, this is just doing programming. Killing time, having fun, talking to people, and kind of, interacting with everybody. But we'll go ahead and get started. So, last night when we were talking about pottery, I very, very briefly mentioned pottery in Asia. And the reason that I briefly mentioned it last night is because one of the questions was pottery in different cultures. And pottery in different cultures, it's huge. Our local history around in our area, most of our history with pottery comes from Native American history. That's where a lot of ours comes from. But globally, pottery was so much more than that. You'll find it a lot in Egypt. Pottery was super, super important in Egypt. And not as an art form, but just like with the Native Americans in Egypt, it was used as a tool. Because one of the things that we find is, again, historically, pottery wasn't seen as, some super cool cup that we made with our hands we're going to drink out of. It was mostly seen as a tool, because this is stuff from the earth. This came right out of the ground, which, when we're talking about Egypt, if it came from the earth, it's really, really special. Which, again, that also relates back to Native American. So this is where we're kind of seeing in few global similarities between different cultures, even though they're like broadly separated. But it's from the earth. It's super easy to get, honestly. In Egypt, I'll have to look up that a little bit more. I wasn't able to find too much about it aside from, yeah, they did use it. But how they used it mostly in Egypt was actually in, a little bit in the sacrificial aspect, but that honestly wasn't as prominent. It was more so used in kind of the religious aspect. So, embalming, mummification. A lot of their jars would be used that way. But something even cooler than that is mummification of animals. Because one of the things that we find in Egypt, whenever we're digging up remains and stuff, a lot of the jars that have been found and dug up, one, they were, again, this is something else that kind of relates back to the Native American thing. Remember last night we talked about Native American used animal imagery a whole lot. Animal imagery was huge. We also find that in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, every single one of their gods, pretty much, every single one of their deities related to an animal. And like we were saying, a lot of the tombs and the jars and the vessels that they dig up had animal imagery. And what's really cool about that, and why I think it's really unique, is what they would do, they would actually mummify the animal that relates to their god. For example, if you are making an offering to Toe, the god of knowledge, he's often represented as a bird. You would mummify a bird, you would build some sort of vase or a vessel that is in the shape of a bird, and you would put the mummified bird in there. That would be your offering to your god. If you were making an offering to Sebek, for example, you would mummify an alligator. So mummification wasn't just with humans, it was also mummifying animals as offerings to the god. And the reason pottery comes into play big with that is because when we're dealing with clay, super easy to mold in whatever shape you want to. Super easy to sculpt. You could sculpt it into the animal. A lot easier than sculpting it into a human face. But the only reason I brought that up is because there were a few questions about that last night, so I wanted to go ahead and answer that before we move into all the cool stuff. Well, I say all the cool stuff. All of it's cool. Before we move into what was actually planned to be talked about. So last night we mentioned China and Japan, which I'm just gonna kind of focus on China. Hey, Eric. And the reason I kind of want to focus on China is because the biggest question was about porcelain and why porcelain wasn't really used with Native Americans. And porcelain, it's super delicate. Like this piece right here is made out of porcelain. It's incredibly, incredibly delicate. And it's not one of those things that you form quickly. This stuff takes a lot of time and a lot of care to really make properly. But where we really see porcelain is ancient Japan. And the way that they made it in ancient Japan is not at all how we make it now. Nowadays, it's mostly factory made. Back then, though, they had a very special form of clay in China called kaolin. And I might be mispronouncing that, but it's Kaolin. And that's literally just white China clay. Nowadays, we kind of use it, but not that much. Most of what we use in the modern era is called raku, which kind of the same concept, but we don't mix that with anything to make porcelain. It's its own separate entity. But what they would do is they would harvest feldspar and they would mix it with this clay and that would make porcelain. And what they found was not only is that a lot more malleable, but it's a lot more pleasant to look at. It gets this beautiful glossy white and smooth shape. And that's mostly just in China, but that's where porcelain pretty much comes from. And it was mostly used as an art form in China. When we're looking at things like Egypt and our Native American culture, it's pretty much all tools. It's all stuff that they're going to use constantly to store food, with Egypt to store offerings and stuff like that. When we're looking at China, though, it's mostly all decorative. We're mostly looking at their art forms. And they were huge on art. If you remember, one of the things that we talked about is their sentimentality and how if a piece got damaged, they valued their pieces so much that if a piece got damaged, it would be melted down, or, excuse me, precious metals would be melted down and used as a glue to fix the broken piece. And when we're dealing with porcelain, pieces get broken all the time, which is why that practice became huge in Asia, because porcelain is super easy to break. And that's also why when we're dealing with ancient China, it's mostly just an art form, kind of like a status symbol. It's mostly just decorative. But where we see it used the most often is in the tea ceremony, which is something it should be really, really familiar because it's super popular and it's in a lot of modern day media, the tea ceremony. But the tea ceremony was very, very important in Chinese culture. And most of the teapots that we see being used is porcelain. And again, because of that color, that purity, that smoothness, it's super easy to decorate any way you want, and it just looks fantastic. I didn't get any of my other porcelain pieces out, but I can get those out later if you guys just really want to see it. But another reason porcelain was used, compared to other clays, it doesn't have to get that hot. It can be fired at about 1400 degrees. I'll check my notes here just to fact check myself real quick. Yeah, 1400 Celsius. That's about 2600, 2500 Fahrenheit, roughly, give or take. I'll fact check myself on that real quick, too. Yeah, so 2650. Yeah, here we go. But when we look at some of the non-decorative pieces, again, still at porcelain because that was so abundant, we see a lot of it sort of being used, but still it's mostly just trinkets, gifts, stuff that's being handed out. So that's just to kind of touch up on porcelain and answer some of the questions that I got last night. I'm going to go through my notes real quick just to make sure that I didn't leave anything about that unanswered. And porcelain and like Chinese history of porcelain, it's something that you could super easily find if you just want a lot more detail. I'm not going to go into too much detail just because that's not what I had planned tonight. I just want to touch up on it and answer the questions. Hi, Cassie. But if y'all do want me to go into detail with that at a later time, I don't mind at all. It's super, super cool. There's a lot of history behind it that you would not realize or even imagine, but it's just a super awesome thing. But, alright. Hi, Miss Gloria. Another question I had last night was... here it is. So another question I had last night, because, oh, thanks, Richard. Don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But another question we had last night when we were talking about Native American is, and I didn't answer this into too much detail last night, just because we were mostly just talking about pottery. But I'm going to go ahead and answer this question. I'm going to answer this question in a bit of detail because it's a really good question and it's something I love to talk about. And the question was, when we're looking at Native American hunting and gathering, aside from pottery, what is often being used? And that's an excellent question. First off, what I want to say is pottery, and I may have miscommunicated that last night, so let me just back up real quick and re-say what I was trying to get across. Last night when we were talking about gathering, hey Kataya, what I wanted to get across was pottery was used in hunting and gathering, but it wasn't at all used to do the actual act of hunting. It was used for storage. So just in case I miscommunicated that, I just want to clear that up real quick. But aside from pottery, and that's the reason kind of this stuff right here is out on the table, Native American culture, one of the things we see that we do not see nowadays is their use of whatever they're hunting. Every single part of the animal would be used. So hunting, for example, one of the things that we see a lot of in artifacts in our area. Now this is a little bit, it could be called global, but I'm focusing on our local history with Native American. So we're not going to think too broadly, but the ideas that I'm talking about can be taken to other countries and other places with indigenous people. But focusing on just our area, one of the things that was hunted a lot would be deer. Now, obviously, when the Native Americans are going out hunting, this is not sport. This is not at all sport. Nowadays, it is a sport. Back then, it was survival. So, if you remember one of the things that I said last night, when we're talking about this stuff, we're going to put ourselves in the mindset of survival. So, when I'm finding this deer, I'm not going after that deer because it's the biggest buck I've ever seen. I'm going after that deer because it's food, I'm hungry, I got to eat, and I got to survive. So, putting ourselves in that mindset. But every bit of the animal would be used. Nothing would ever go to waste. They had a huge, huge belief. And Zachary, I'm glad you're here since I'm talking about this because you might have some input as well. But they had an absolutely huge belief on honoring that animal, making sure nothing goes to waste. Every bit of it would be eaten. Anything that could be eaten would be eaten. But then we get into things like the bones, the ribs, the antlers, all the other pieces that we cannot eat. And this is actually a very universal tool. It has a lot more uses than you would think. And the Native Americans took huge advantage of this. This antler right here, you could sharpen the tip into needles. We often find sewing needles made out of bone. Sometimes antler, most of the time, and most of them that I've seen that are authentic were made out of bone. And the reason for that, bone is a lot easier to size down to the size that you would need. It's a lot easier to break, and you also have a lot more of it. The antler sometimes would be used for that, but mostly this would be used for harder tasks that require, a lot stronger material. A lot of what we see is actual handles for tools. So you'll see a lot of ancient flint blades, like knives, being used, and almost all the time the handle is an antler. If it's not an antler, it's wood, but usually an antler, just because it's a lot stronger. And it fits, even, all these different sizes fit in the hand really well. That natural curve really helps with just a good grip. But when we talk about sharpening it, the antler itself could be used as a knife if you really needed to. Aside from that, we see the invention of one of the most complex tools and pieces of technology, and it's called the atlatl, which was invented by indigenous people. And more often than not, the atlatl is made out of the antler. And if you don't know what an atlatl is, I don't have one of my own to show you, sadly. But what it is it's an extension of your arm. And it's used to throw darts. In fact, the translation is dart thrower, spear thrower. There's a few different iterations of it, but that's the general concept. And it would literally be used to throw the darts, the actual, long stick with something pointy at the end. That's the basic concept of a dart. The atlatl would be used to actually throw that. And it would most often, again, be made out of antler because of that natural curve. And what they would do, they would find a good antler like this with a notch at the end, and that's what would be used to put their spear against. And it extends the arm. So whenever you make that motion, like you're trying to throw the actual dart, one, you get a lot more reach. You get a lot more reach because it extends your arm. But other than that, you get a lot more power, speed, penetration force, and it's a lot easier to throw it with this than with your bare hands. So that's just one example of them using every part of the animal. Another thing that we could see is jawbones. You may not realize it, but jawbones are incredibly strong. And if you find them with all the teeth in like this, and they're in perfectly super deep, super sturdy, you could really mess somebody up with this. And often, where we find jawbones being used is these would be attached to a stick and used as kind of like a hammer and axe, basically just a hacking tool. These would be a weapon because these things would really mess somebody up. And you find, again, this is something you'll find pretty much in globally. This is a practice not just in our local cultures. This is something you see all over the place. Another example of them using every part of the animal. Skulls would mostly be decorative. There's no real use for the skull to be used as any kind of tool or anything like that, but it's decorative. You'll find these in a lot of religious and spiritual practices in the cultures, and also just for trophies. So with the skulls, not many uses for tools like the other pieces of the bone. But again, every single piece of the bone. I don't have a bigger leg bone, sadly. But this right here is, well, obviously not this one, a much bigger one, is a very important bone that they would use. And it's because of this knob right here called your trochanter. This is what attaches the leg to the hip. But why that's the most important piece is how hard and how dense it is. Buffalo were a huge thing, just in size, obviously, but also very important for them to hunt because it has a lot of meat, a lot of bones, and a lot of skin. But the leg bone of a buffalo or a bison with the trochanter on it is an awesome hammer. That's something else that we see them actually using, which is kind of crazy to think about. So, just again, another example, every piece is used. So that was just another question I got that I really wanted to touch on. And that's pretty much all the questions that I had last night. So, one question I do, or not really a question, but a few things that people were interested in was terracotta. And give me just a moment. Let me find my notes that I had on the Terracotta Army. Well, if I can find my notes. Apparently I did not write that down, so that might be something I'll have to talk about tomorrow. We'll probably just use that as tomorrow's kind of program. Yeah, we'll save that for tomorrow. So, with all that said, and pretty much all the questions from last night answered, I want to get into the actual planned topic, which was the stories, myths, and legends in Native American culture. Because there is a whole mess. There's more than we could ever cover just tonight. So this is probably going to be something that I do more than one video over. But one thing I want to make like super clear before I get started on this, because some of the stories are very silly. I'm going to be honest, a lot of the stories that we find are silly. But they weren't silly to the Native Americans. Because what we have to realize, Native Americans do not have the understanding of how things are made and where they come from like we do. At all. So, a lot of times they were just kind of having their own beliefs. And a lot of their beliefs were spiritual. And some of them were just kind of, fun stories. The ones that I plan to tell tonight is, I wanted to tell one of my favorite ones, or two of my favorite ones, which is the story of fire and the story of sassafras. Those are two of my favorite ones. And another one I really wanted to talk about was the Star Keeper, because it's just a really cute and fun story. So, the first one we'll go over is the Star Keeper, because it is the shortest, but it's also just a really fun one. And this is basically a Native American folktale over where the stars came from and why the stars they're just scattered all over the place. So, the story starts off with the actual Star Keeper, who was a deity. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the name. I'm horrible with punctuation as it is. And I really don't like mispronouncing Native American names. So, we're just going to call him by his English translation, Star Keeper. And the basic description for the Star Keeper is just your average man. Just looked like a normal person. The only difference he had compared to normal people was that he had kind of like a Santa Claus bag, a leather satchel over his shoulder, full to the brim with stars, like actual in the sky stars, filled to the brim. And what he would do is he spent his entire life walking around every inch of the sky, placing the stars in a nice, orderly fashion. Because you see, long ago, the stars weren't scattered around like they are today. They had a pattern. They told stories, and they drew their own pictures. Which, there's also another iteration of this story from a different tribe that goes along with it. But the main differences are how the story ends, which I'm going to mention that at the end of the story, just so I don't give away anything before we actually get into it. But he's walking along the entirety of the sky, entirety of the galaxy, placing the stars in a nice orderly fashion. He had a pet, and his pet was a fox. And foxes are known as being sly, and in Native American folklore, they get that reputation from this story. But they're known as being super sly. One night, the Star Keeper was tired. He just took a nap. And he was using his satchel as a pillow. The fox saw this as an opportunity to play a prank on his master. And he started taking out the stars one by one just to see if he would notice. Starkeeper never noticed, didn't even react. So what Fox did was grab the entire satchel and took off running. Which, in the story, the Starkeeper's head was suddenly just slammed into the ground. And in his stupor, he said, "You sly fox, come back here with my bag." He struggled to his feet, gathered his senses, and took off running after Fox. And the fox had the bag held in such a way that stars were constantly spilling out. Just constantly spilling out. And going all over the place. No pattern, no rhythm whatsoever. Just spilling out at random. And he continued this chase for a year. Until the bag was completely empty of stars. And after he recovered his satchel, he saw that all his work was pretty much wasted. Only a few stars were put in patterns to make the shapes and tell the story, the constellations. Only a few of them were left like that. All the rest of them were just scattered at random. So the Starkeeper had to spend the rest of his life picking up the stars and taking them back where they were supposed to be. Which, their belief in why some stars twinkle and some stars go out and they seem to move is because it's the Starkeeper picking them up and moving them back into place. So their belief on how stars came to be and why sometimes they go out is based on that story. Now, one thing about this story is depending on what tribes you look at, kind of gives you the answer on if they actually believed in this legend. Some tribes did, and some of the research I've been doing, some of them just saw it as a fun little story to tell. But the next story we're going to go over, I said was going to be my second favorite, which is the story of Sassafras. And the reason I really love this story, one, it has a sentimental side that I won't get into. You can ask me that later. But it's also just a really cute and heartwarming story. And this is where I want to explain something else, just so I don't offend anybody. It goes without saying, the Native Americans had their own beliefs, their own ideals, and their own gods. And this story has to deal with their creator. And their creator is their version of our God. So just keep that in mind when we go through this story. Because they had completely different set of beliefs. But the story goes like this. There is their form of heaven, which their creator isn't always at. And in this story, he was not. He was actually on our earth. And he had a little house. And he was sitting in this house one winter day. And, you know, during the winter, a lot of plants are dying out. So the creator was on earth in this house during winter to get the next season's plants ready and planted so that they could start blooming. He was creating plants. And he had already made a whole bunch of them. And he had 3 stems left and 3 different leaves. And I really wish I had a good example of this. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is after the video or even while I'm telling the story, Google sassafras leaves. Because they have one leaf that looks like just your normal leaf. They have one leaf that kind of looks like an oven mitt. Has a little thumb and just the normal leaf shape. And then they have one leaf that, well, we'll just do it like that. Kind of looks like this. Has a thumb, a little thing coming off here, and a little thing in the middle. Kind of like 3 fingers. Just like that. So keep that in mind. Google some images while we're going through the story. But he had 3 leaves that looked like that, and he had 3 stems. His son was out playing at the time. So the creator picked up a stem, just kind of looked at it for a minute, and grabbed the first leaf, which is just your generic leaf shape. And he was just about to add it to the stem when his son comes rushing in. And he's like, "Dad, it's starting to snow really bad, and I want to go out and play, but I don't have any gloves. Can you make me some?" So he took that normal leaf that he was going to use on the plant, decided that he had enough set aside for later, and went ahead and made a pair of mittens with no thumbs, no fingers, just, mittens. Put them on his son's hands and sent him out. And the creator was about to get back to work when he realized, well, he used up his leaves making the gloves. So he took that stem, completely wasted, and set it aside. Also, hey guys, for those that are just joining, we're just talking about Native American storytelling. We just got done talking about different uses of tools and pottery. So if you have any questions about the tools or pottery, you just feel free to ask them, and I'll get to them after we finish up with the storytelling segment. But so basically, the creators saw that stem as completely wasted. So he put it aside, grabbed his next stem and his next set of leaves, and started to get to work. When his son came in again, and this time his son was like, "Dad, it's snowing, but I really can't play with these mittens. They work, but it's hard for me to pick anything up because I have no use of my thumbs." So father looked around for a minute, picked up the leaf that had the little thumb on it, sewn those into mittens, put them on his son, and sent him back outside. He then realized he had wasted another stem and another set of leaves. So he put that next wasted stem aside and grabbed the next one. And this final leaf is the one that looked like 3 little fingers. And he was about to put that on a stem when his son came in one last time and said, "Dad, there's a lot of deer outside and I can't use my bow because I have no use of my middle fingers. I need those to pull back my string." So his dad took that last leaf that looked like 3 fingers, sewn that into mittens, put them on his son, and sent him outside. Creator was left with nothing but stems. Obviously, you can't make a plant with just stems. You got to have the leaves and stuff that go with it. So he was sitting there trying to think on what he was going to do when his son came in for the last time. And the father, in his frustration, was about to tell his son to just go outside and let him work. But his son didn't have a question this time. He went over to the fireplace, hung up all 3 sets of mittens, and went to sleep. The creator looked at those 3 sets of mittens that he made hanging over the fire, drying, and realized that he actually made something pretty special. So he took all 3 of those leaves, the one that looked like the normal leaf, the one with the thumb, and the one with the 3 fingers, and put all 3 of those leaves on the same stem and went and planted it. And it was called sassafras. And sassafras, because of that story, we find is a very, very important plant in Native American history. And it also kind of carries over into our early settlement history, which I absolutely love to talk about. Can save that for a later segment, or I can talk about that tonight. It's just up to you guys or whoever joins. But that's the story of sassafras. Now, the last Native American story that I want to cover is, this one's just a fun one. This one isn't really something they truly, truly believe in, and it's called the Endless Hunt. This story is a story to explain why there is the bear constellation, and to them, 3 people attacking the bear. And the story goes like this. One day, 3 brothers were sitting around the campfire on their way home when they got word. And one thing I do want to make clear before I go on with the story, there's a lot of iterations of it and a lot of different versions. I'm telling the version I'm most familiar with. If you Google this yourself, you might find an entirely different story or a different version of it. But they all pretty much have the same ending and same concept and the same meaning. There's just a lot of different translations and iterations. So just keep that in mind in case you Google it yourself and find one that has kind of a different setting, different characters and stuff like that. But it starts with 3 brothers. And the 3 brothers get word that one of their encampments was attacked by a bear. This was said to be the biggest bear that has ever been seen. So the 3 brothers took it on themselves to hunt this animal. And they chased it across the forest. They chased it for months through the forest. And each time they were very, very close to getting it, the bear vanished. And they could not figure out why the bear vanished or where it went. So the 3 brothers had a plan. They were going to trap this bear. And once they trapped it, they were going to not only kill it for meat, but they were going to celebrate this. So they laid out the trap, and they had one brother being used as bait. They had him stand out in the middle of the field while the other two brothers waited on either side, bows ready to kill the bear. Bear never came. And they continued this chase for, according to the story, 3 years. And it got so intense, and they wanted this bear so badly that they finally prayed to their God, did an entire ceremony to get the power to finally capture this bear. And this is where the story, remember I said the story does get a little bit silly, and this is where it does get silly. According to the story, the God blessed the 3 brothers with the ability to chase the bear for eternity, no matter where he went. And when they finally caught the bear walked all the way to the stars, all the way to space. And because of the blessing, the brothers were able to chase and hunt the bear wherever the bear went. So they too gained the ability to walk to the stars. And it's said that to this very day, the brothers are still hunting the bear in the stars. And that's why we see the bear constellation and 3 stars surrounding it that represent the 3 brothers. They're in a never-ending hunt for that poor bear. So that's just a few Native American stories. There, like I said, there's a whole lot more, and there's more than we could ever cover in just one night in one video segment. They're really fun, though. I absolutely love telling them. They're so much fun to tell. And some of them are actual, like, legends that they full-heartedly believed in. And others are just, fun stories, like we tell kids. These are stories that they would tell kids. So that's all for the storytelling segment. And I've pretty much covered every topic that I wanted to cover tonight. And I'm pretty sure that I answered all the questions that people still had. And it doesn't say how many people are in here right now. But for those that are, do y'all have any questions or anything I might not have covered? And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to check my notes real quick just to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Doesn't look like I did. Alright, then what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to do another video tonight just because I'm trying to kill a few hours. I'm going to go ahead and take a break though, grab something to eat and something to drink. Hey, Dina! But I'll probably start again later tonight, and if I do, I'll put out a post, and I'll think of a fun topic that we could all go over. What I'm probably going to do, since I didn't get to answer the question on terracotta, I'm probably going to take the time while I'm eating to better research these guys and find out their full history and see why it's not in my notes because it was supposed to be. So hopefully we'll be able to go over some of that tonight. And I might even do an entire segment on Asian mythology and history because the terracotta soldiers go really, really deep into Asian legends because they are an actual legend that goes with them. So I'll take my time, look that stuff up. If I do another video, I'll put up a post. If not, I'll have another one up tomorrow. Thank y'all.